Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm really grateful. What I want to talk about is the effect
Hi,
of
D-trans woman else.
Oz. I could
Oz.
have it Oz, Ouse.
Is this
um,
because you're anonymous on this platform, or is that just you're not anonymous, that's just your screen name?
it's because it's the name of the account that I registered with. But
Oh, I see.
and so I
Hi,
tried to change
Lee. Great to see you.
it. I tried to change it to D-Trans Woman Oz because I'm just a singular person,
Just
but I
singular,
couldn't.
yeah,
So I'll
true.
have to go
Oh,
through the settings and change that. Thank you for picking up that very tiny
so
detail.
you're a they, them for the purposes of this
Yeah, I'm
detransition
they theming
podcast.
today. That's right. I they them
Inconvenient.
for a while, and it's very relevant because nice segue, Holly. Thank you very much. The reason I want to talk today about the effect of gender norms on female people and women is because, well, after I stopped taking testosterone and identifying as a trans man, I identified as non-binary, and that was a good chunk of time afterwards. And that's pretty common among detransition women to sort of take this step down before you completely de-identify.
Hmm.
And the thing that made me stop using this term non-binary to describe myself was your book, your first book, Gender Critical Feminism. And not
What an
even,
honor,
well,
honestly. Like
I think
that's
I think it's an honor.
No,
I've
I'm
told you a
I'm
couple of
probably the
times.
greatest. Yeah.
It
Yeah, but you
was
never really like honestly, it's a pretty remarkable thing and you've only ever sort of slipped it into conversation in passing, and so I'm always like, did she say that? Is that did she mean that? It's like, no, is that true? Because that's like really cool if that's true. That's
yeah,
yeah.
no, it's 100% true. It's so funny that I've only sort of slipped it sideways with you. I must be being
Yeah,
like
you've never
embarrassed or
just like
coy.
told me.
Because I have told other people, like I've been like, Holly did this thing, she wrote this book, and there's this one line in the book, and it really convinced me that I'd made a mistake in how I was thinking about feminism. And there's several other people I've told
Amazing.
about that, but I've just been coy and embarrassed with you apparently. So no, you
Amazing.
absolutely did. You
Yeah.
have a
No, I mean it's so cool. It's like the that it would make the whole because there was a lot of drama around that book getting
yeah,
it to publication, and that would be enough of a reason to have written it. You know, one person, it's important to them. So
yeah.
thank
No,
you for
it was
telling me.
very no. Well, thank you. It was very persuasive. I just made sort of a cognitive error in that had snowballed, basically. So I made this
Hmm.
cognitive error that if you identify as non-binary, you're telling the world you you identify as non-binary or you use the term non-binary um, to tell the world that you don't want the female gender role applied to you. It makes you uncomfortable. Um,
Yeah.
but the cognitive mistake I'd made is that actually that doesn't stop the gender norm from being applied to you, and it's way cooler and tougher to just say, yeah, I'm a woman, but I'm a weird woman, and deal with it.
Yes.
And that was just
Yes.
excellent.
This is a way to be a woman.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay.
There's no right way to be a woman. There's no wrong way to be a woman. You just are a woman, and if you're masculine, if you're feminine, if you're just a weird neutral jelly person, that's like fine.
So do you know the line? Do you have the
I
line to
do.
hand that you?
Um,
Okay, because that would be helpful for me to know.
well, yeah, I mean, it's not particularly. Uh, the line is gender nonconformity is normal.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
okay, that's short. One
yeah,
could remember
sure.
that, couldn't one?
One could remember that. It's in the a chapter. It's called a section of a chapter called gender nonconforming women and girls.
Yeah,
Anyway, so it's just, and
yeah.
you end this paragraph with gender nonconformity is normal. And I legitimately had this moment. I was reading the book on Kindle or whatever, and you know when you read a really good line in a really good book and you go, huh, and you think about it for a couple of seconds. Do you ever do that?
Yes.
Yeah, I
No,
had that
constantly.
moment
Yeah.
over that line, and it was literally from that second I was
Nice.
like, oh, no, non-binary is not the way to make the change in the world that I want. The way to make the change is to be like just a weird woman. I'm a weird woman, cope, basically.
Yes.
So I thought today it would be really helpful for viewers who might be identifying as non-binary or even trans men or questioning their gender or trying to wrangle with what all this stuff means. If we could talk basically about this thesis, what is the effect? What are gender norms? What effect do they have on women and girls? And
Hmm.
how do we cope with that? Basically, so
Yeah.
we talked a lot already about gender roles, gender stereotypes. Could we start off with? Can you tell us what gender norms are and where they came from?
Yeah, so where they came from is probably a longer answer, but what they are in the snappy version is just expectations associated with, you could say, like rewards and sanctions, or like costs and benefits applied to people on the basis of sex. So the thesis of gender norms is that in virtue of being female, you are like subject to norms and expectations pushing and policing you into femininity, and in virtue of being male, same story, pushing you into norms of masculinity. And there's like, of course, room for a lot of debate about who exactly is doing that. Like, is that the patriarchy? Is it men? Is it the system? Have we all internalized it? Is it history and okay, huge like debate to get into there about exactly how that got started or what's the main culprit keeping it going today. But the thesis is an empirical one. There's plenty of evidence for it. Lots of people work on this, and they work on it through like all different life stages. They work on it at different points of history. Like you can get studies on like how one of my favorite ones is about the babies. They disguise them, like they'll put a female baby in a blue hat and vice versa, and then they just see how parents play with them differently or give them different toys.
Yeah.
You know, so you can have all these, or you can look at toddlers interacting with carers and how they play, and you can look at what like books for school age children are encoding in terms of like their stories, right? Like what are the protagonist boys character traits versus the girls, and what sort of messaging is that? You know, this stuff is absolutely everywhere in culture. And so you can sort of look at, once you've got that thesis in hand, okay, the sexes are being like treated differently in a way that's like channeling them into these feminine, masculine people roles. You can start looking for evidence of that and mechanisms for doing that everywhere. And you can start like being a skeptic about it. Like, okay, well, how pervasive really are these roles in television? Or, you know, you can get support. So I recently watched this new Netflix show Geek Girl. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but
not yet.
It's very interesting because I think they never use the word, but I think they're trying to portray an autistic girl being very different. Like there's all this narrative about how different she feels, and she has all these like facts about dinosaurs and stuff. Like so, and it has these tropes of what you would expect if you, but she's heartbreakingly beautiful and thin and vulnerable, right? So it's like and then you could say, okay, like what is that a normal presentation of what like an autistic high school girl into dinosaurs is likely to look like? She's also somehow really competent in putting her makeup on and doing the mermaid hair curls. No, right? Like, and so what's being taught to us? Oh, that like beauty is the most important part of being a woman or whatever. So sorry, that's like a long answer, but that's just to kind of say this is an empirical thesis that can be like shored up with evidence and also proven wrong with evidence as well.
Yeah, so when we have this theory that there are gender norms that are not innate, they're socially enforced with what is it, like sanctions and consequences if you deviate from them, and you can take this thesis and rewards. Yes, rewards, very important, and you can take this thesis out into the world and measure the effects of it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So, and you're right. Sorry, I should have very much pointed that out, that the innateness thesis is the alternative, right? So some people are going to want to say, no, we have like, I can wheel you in a story. Religious people are going to say the story is God created the sexes to be different. And the like evolutionary psychologists are going to say like, well, in the Pleistocene, we got these sex-separated impulses for predators and mating and whatever. And so one story is like men and women just really are different by nature, and so that's showing up in women doing more kindergarten work and men doing more engineering. And then the alternative feminist hypothesis is no, we're actually more or less the same, but all the weight of these norms and practices is making us like it's really exaggerating whatever tiny differences there were. So those are the two competing hypotheses. Sorry, I should have said that.
No, that's all right. And you can, even in your book, you say you don't have to accept blank slatism, so that we're completely the same and it's all enculturated, to accept or believe, if you like, the evidence that there is still socially enforced gender norms. You can have some differences between the sexes, like differences in size, for example, or differences in sexuality. So a straight man and a heterosexual man and a heterosexual woman are very different because they are attracted to the opposite sex, right? Yeah. So you can have differences that may be innate and still have gender roles. You don't have to be all the way one and all the way the other. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So there's room to argue about which of the differences that we observe are in fact innate sex differences, if there are any. Yeah. And you could be a person who just thinks there's like really good evidence to support that there's at least these 5, but that still doesn't mean like women belong in the kitchen and men don't, or whatever. So I think a lot of the sophisticated fight is really on over like which is which, and I think sort of between the if there are any, like blank slate often gets used as this really pejorative term, but I sort of see that as propaganda, and I think in the book I was a bit generous about it actually, because I've almost reacted to the propaganda like, no, I'm not a blank slater. Hold on, that's just the name for a person who rejects the thesis of a pre-filled slate, and it's not at all obvious that the pre-filled slate sex differentiated thesis is true or supported by like the weight of evidence. I don't know enough about that stuff yet to like confidently start being furious at the anti-blank slaters, but I've been reading a lot more since that book came out, and I'm less like, oh no, of course I'm not. Maybe I am. Maybe I am.
Maybe
I'm
you
not
just
sure.
all blank slate.
Like even sexual orientation, right? Like you can make the case that like so much of that practice, like what looks like men and women are so different, a lot of that can be explained by social practices and social taboos, right? I mean, there's so much taboo and stigma around male homosexuality. And there's already been this concession that like, well, women's sexuality is different to men's. Okay, so now it's supposed to be that the most robust allegedly innate sex difference is sexual orientation, but only for men. Okay, and then then what? The feminists will ask us to think about, well, is it which is more likely? It's innate or it's being propped up by these threats and sanctions? Well, shit, there's an awful lot of threats and sanctions going on. So what would we expect to see of male sexuality in a world with like no stigma at all and people just being encouraged to follow their crushes and just, I'm not sure, but I'm certainly not gonna like thump the table and say like, no, it just is an enormous coincidence that exactly the threats and sanctions don't hold anything in place. That's got to be false. So even that there's room to argue about, right?
Yeah, I think so too. It's pretty controversial to say maybe sexual orientation isn't, maybe you're not born that way, maybe it's enculturated into you. And there is, I'm not across the details, but there is a discourse that in utero exposure to, I think, testosterone has an influence on sexual orientation, later developed sexual orientation. I'm not across the details, but someone might rebut and say, well, there's this mechanistic physiological process that contributes.
Yeah, and it's tricky too, right? Because one thing is to endorse the prenatal hormone theory for what makes a person who is like stubbornly gay. I'm going to use that phrase because there's the stubbornly gays, and then there's the like, kind of opportunistic, or if the threats and sanctions get low enough, maybe I'm a bisexual now, but otherwise I'm just like a sheep. There's all those people too. So one thing is to have an adequate explanation for the people who know who they are, regardless of the threats. That's the boys out of the closet, even in a homophobic society. But it's quite another one to say the boys out of the closet is the full extent of the homosexual male population. Maybe not. Maybe just got a lot of people who are fearful and conformist and kind of can get it up for anyone, but would have a much better time with men. And then if there was no homophobic stigma, they would be gay. And then it's not 3%, it's like 20% or 50% or everyone's bisexual. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Myself, I'm attracted to men and women myself, and for that reason, I stay out of the homosexuality is innate or heterosexuality is innate because I'm flexible. So It's hard
Yeah,
for
but
me
there's
to
still
imagine.
interesting questions, right, about why you're flexible, right? So you might think, well, okay, the more that you grow up in a lesbophobic or biphobic culture or environment, the more it's interesting evidence if you still are those things, or the more that you're encouraged and pushed, like everyone assumes that you're heterosexual and you'll kind of fight for. Like, yeah, everyone can think about what pressures have been brought to bear on them and how things might be different if they had different pressures or no pressures, right?
Yeah. And
yeah.
the thing with blank slatism, whether it's about sexuality or personality or the job you have, is that we don't have the blank slatists, not to use it as a pejorative, but people who follow the blank slate theory versus people who follow the predetermined theory, neither has the counterfactual.
Yeah.
Right? We haven't run the experiment, so we don't really know. Would you say that's fair?
Neither has the counterfactual. You mean we've never been able to run the experiment of how things go with the sexes in a society without sex differentiated treatment.
Yeah. Without gender norms.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true. And then, but what would the other is there another paired counterfactual? What would that one be?
I think that's the experiment. So I didn't mean to say that there would be more than one experiment. There might be, but what I mean is that the counterfactual. Yeah, I used the wrong word, but the experiment is run a society where there's no social sanctions, there's no gender norms, and so there's no social sanctions, and see what the sexes do.
Yes, no, that's right. And this often comes up in, like, people will say, oh, well, all cultures throughout history, women have been like this. Yeah, there's always been patriarchy, like this, at least since way before you could know anything or there was much evidence of, right? Well, that's the stuff we have evidence about, like the first stone tablets or whatever with the first primitive laws. We're already well into like nation states by that time, right? So, okay, we know something about hunter-gatherer, like tribal life, and then we know something about the emergence of the First Nation states, and from then on, they've always been patriarchal. There's always been this exchange of women. There's always been women being used for their like wife and instrumentalized for sex possibilities. Like, so it's not as though we've just done this rigorous all possible experiments throughout time and then seen how things went. It's not like we've had a matriarchy and then watched as women refused to take up presidencies and instead chose kitchen work, right? Like that's just not, we haven't done that. So yeah, you can often get this like sense of, well, across all different cultures and throughout time, men have been like this and women have been like this, as though that now settles the matter of like what women are like. No, not at all.
Yeah. So we're talking all about these social sanctions. Let's can we nail down what is the female gender role and how is it socially enforced on us?
Yeah, again, I think it's like a big thing you could focus on different aspects of. So I've just been writing a lecture on feminine gender norms, and I was trying to decide like what is the thing that the student like the students will be interested in, or what things are sort of maybe just I haven't thought about enough before. And I ended up focusing on clothes, partly because I think I haven't thought that, well, I guess I've had the obvious thoughts, right? But like, oh, we have to remove our body hair and they don't, or like, but reading a little more about the history of confinement or whatever, like the way that long skirts mean you can't walk upstairs, or bustle hoop petticoats, or corsets, all that sort of thing, or the way that the more delicate fabrics kind of they cause. Susan Brandmiller was telling the story about like women's clothing makes women the actress, like she's always able to like put on this new persona somehow through those clothes and like change her identity or change her character for the day. So
as a previously trans-identified person, feeling that, changing your clothes to change your identity, it's a thing that you do. And you can do it in lots of directions. So it's like I was instrumentalizing the gender norms in that way.
Yes, exactly. Which is interesting, right? That it's a further sort of proof of how powerful they are in a way,
Yeah.
that like we've developed these practices that really separate people. I also use this story from like 1914 by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and she's just talking about pockets. It's all just the wonder of, she's this woman who suddenly becomes a man, and she's like, oh my God, like my things are right here. Like she's feeling armed and ready to go. Like she's
Yeah.
got a pen, she's got her keys, she's got her checkbook. Like everything is just like this person who's, let's say, the experience of functionality, shoes that are comfortable on the foot and you can run and spring in, just
Yeah.
these kinds of differences. So I'm not speaking to, we'd have to just sort of go through and talk about like, yeah, comportment, like women taking up less space, they cross their legs, or they don't man spread on the train, or so you could talk about body movements, gait, walk, taking up space, striding. You could talk about public sphere, like men owning the nighttime, right? Like, why is there a reclaim the night march? It's because the night is like not safe for women, and women sort of socialize into safety practices that mean they're not, women are not walking through the park alone at night or whatever. So you could pick up any of these different aspects of feminine norms: clothing, comportment, public space, job segregation. But like I was looking at this, the way the social psychologists measure it, and it's sort of beliefs about things like, one was called sweet and nice, I think. It's like this idea that women are the more like kind ones, which actually I think explains so much of contemporary politics too. It's like
At the moment, yeah.
Like the TERFs are bad because they're not kind to trans women or whatever. So sorry, I know that sounds like a big messy answer, but the question as to what the content of norms of femininity is, it has all these different aspects, and then you kind of have to dive in and talk in detail about any particular one. But I think something that I think it was maybe actually it was this other paper about the thing I mentioned with the sweet and nice measure. Anyway, there was one paper more recently that was saying things seem to have really shifted more recently in the concept of femininity toward clothing. So it's like it has become less about these attitudes and behaviors and virtue type differences, and it is more in the aesthetic. And again, that makes a lot of sense of the like contemporary trans, non-binary and trans man type movements, I think.
Yeah. Well, there is in the trans literature, the idea that gender is, even if it is also norms, it is a performance. And so you can wear a different costume. And as a previously trans-identified person, even now just as a woman, still a woman, but as a woman, the clothes I wear, I choose them because I know they're going to have an effect in the world. For example, I choose not to wear tight clothes because I don't like the way it makes me feel. Probably some of that's internalized, but it's also because I become wary, I suppose, or conscious of being ogled. Ogled, I think.
I've only seen it written down, so I would say ogled.
Ogled, yes. I knew there was an O sound that I was missing. So,
but I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that when I read it, that's how it sounds in my head.
And so I won't wear tight clothes, but I am sort of weird, quirky person. I like bright things, but I steer away from them because bright colors and patterns are sort of feminine coded. And I worry if I signal femininity out in the world, I'm going to attract to female gender norms more so than if I just wear black jeans and a t-shirt.
Oh, interesting. So there's actually things where, as a matter of self-expression, you would prefer to wear them to like be yourself, but you choose not to because of the way they signal in the world.
Because of two reasons, related reasons. One is I've probably internalized the social enforcement of the gender norm, and I'm reacting to it.
Which many people, that's normal, right?
Yeah, that's normal. The trick is to escape them, and that's what we're all working on, right?
Yeah.
But the choice of clothes is, and I think trans-identified people and non-binary people and all sorts do this. You choose clothes to have an effect on how people will treat you. So moving from my clothing style didn't change a lot when I was trans-identified, whether I was a trans man or non-binary or trans-masculine. My pants were baggier, but I was still wearing T-shirts and hoodies, basically, or button-up shirts. And you wear them to have an effect on how people will treat you. So it's almost like trying to instrumentalize the gender norms in that way.
Yeah. Did you ever go from like when you were just pre all of those identities, did you ever wear feminine clothing, skirts, dresses, swishy things?
Yeah. Yep.
You did?
I did, and I don't know why I stopped. As a kid, I didn't, but I had this interview isn't about me, but thank you for asking, and I'll take the
I'm just interested, yeah.
As a kid, I was just wearing practical clothes for running about, skateboarding or climbing trees, and I had this moment where some older girl, like a teenager, criticized me for wearing boys' clothes. It's pretty common among young girls who wear boys' clothes. You get called a lesbian or a dyke or get made fun of. And then I stopped and I tried wearing girls' clothes, and then it's uncomfortable. It's always been uncomfortable. And so I sort of, throughout my life, have gone swishy girls' clothes, boys' clothes, swishy girls' clothes. And so it's, yeah.
But it sounds like it's not, because I think the thing you said about colours almost made it sound like there's the sense in which you would want to, but you want to avoid the consequences. Whereas what you just said makes it sound like you are kind of naturally more comfortable in tomboy style clothes, but you felt some pressure from this criticizing older girl, and so you tried out being feminine for a while and then dropped that, and then like that sounds more complicated to me, right? Like you actually were a gender non-conforming woman all along, and you got a bit susceptible to being pushed in certain ways, and then maybe you went very far in the I guess I really am not a woman direction.
The way I explained my history with using clothes and how that interacts with gender norms is complicated. I kind of told two different stories, and I guess I haven't really figured it out, because if I wear a skirt, I feel very weird. I feel very weird about it, but I'm not anti-skirt. Skirts are fun. They can have you can sort of get a good pattern on a skirt that you can't get in other clothes. So I haven't, it's perhaps a good example of how we can internalize the gender norms, and we come not to know what we really want, just how we want to feel. Excuse me. And how I want to feel is to be able to, run about, to kneel down without hiking up my skirt. Excuse me. But I also want to be like, look at these big, awesome flowers and dog prints or whatever I've got on my skirt. That dinosaurs is a good example.
That makes it sound like you shouldn't go that way.
I know. Well, I don't have a good fashion sense. I did a speech recently, just a public speech about how basically most trans-identified people are just young women, young non-binary women with poor mental health, and one of the comments on the video was, "You have no drip," and that was the worst comment I got out of all of it.
You have no drip? What does that mean?
Like fashion, sense of style. And I was
that's mean.
Hit me deep. Oh, it's all right. It was just a troll, but it was true. The things that we respond to most are the things that we worry are true. And I was like, yeah. So anyway, clothes and trans-identifying women and non-binaries and particularly tomboys, clothes are a big thing. So
yes,
they cause feelings.
Another like pop culture version of this, which I don't know how many people would have watched, because in Australia you would have to have a VPN for the UK. But there's a new show called I Kissed a Girl by the BBC, which is like, I think
I haven't watched it yet.
It's the first, I think, lesbian, or they of course say queer girls, but like dating hookup show.
Right.
And I found it really interesting watching, like as a radical feminist, as someone who teaches feminism and is like thinking about how's this stuff showing up to young women. I realized I had this total like default assumption that lesbians would be more gender non-conforming because they would be more free of like heterosexual, like any part of feminine gender norms that is imposed by or policed by the expectations of male sexual attention or intrasexual competition between females, that would all be knocked out. So I just thought we're going to get a lot of cool tomboy types wearing no makeup and just being like full human beings on BBC, which is so great. And it was shockingly not like that. Like, again, probably no one else is surprised, but there was a very kind of clear split into the like mask femme.
Yeah.
Even the masks were often wearing makeup, which I found bizarre, and they often had long hair, which I didn't understand what's going on. And then they would have these like dancing things where they would learn twerking and stuff, so they were self-sexualizing on camera to the point of like sometimes like they're in their bikinis and one's like slapping the ass of the other one. Like it looked like soft porn for men to enjoy. These are, and I just, every episode, but they're so heavily made up. It was like a Married at First Sight, Hen's Night style levels of getting dolled up. And there was one woman who I'm just now completely in love with. Like, it's just TV crush.
Excellent.
One woman, who was this black woman, I think out of maybe like 14 or 20 or something total. Right. And this one woman who just wore baggy shorts and a baggy t-shirt. She didn't join in the slutty dancing. She never self-objectified. Yeah. And I think the only time we even saw her in like few clothes was on like a boiling hot day where they were all swimming, where she had shorts and then like a sports bra. Like there was just nothing. She just seemed like the only person who was just secure, like, again, I don't even know what to think of this, but was secure, like was just a human being relating with the other human beings and not having to at all perform femininity for anyone.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you find that surprising. I think for me, it just made me realize like, oh, lesbians are no exception at all to feminine gender norms. And maybe even on the contrary, they are trying to overcompensate or compensate for the fact that they're not heterosexual. Maybe they feel that that's a threat to their femininity or womanhood somehow. So they're like going even further with the femme stuff. And maybe that was just a stupid thing I never realized, but I was really like, I just expected this amazing cast of these glorious tomboy rad femme types, and they weren't.
Yeah. That's very optimistic of you to assume that a TV show is going to have just all these
stupid
chapstick lesbians and butch lesbians. Right. That would be amazing. And you can just have these women on TV who are, like you say, just fully human and just ignore the male gaze, basically.
Yeah.
But alas.
But are you saying alas because you think it's like that's just not going to attract viewers, so it's a TV thing? There's plenty of those women out there, they're just not the ones that made the cast? Or do you think I'm wrong, even that there's that many of those, that there's a correlation between lesbians and even being that kind of woman anymore? Like, which one's naive? I mean,
maybe both. But a couple of, to address both. So regarding the TV, I think it would be the audience for a dating show of butch lesbians or chapstick lesbian. Like, how would you describe a chapstick lesbian for viewers who are not
I don't even really know what that means. I'd just say butch probably, but I don't know if it means the same thing. Like, but not makeup, not long hair, not feminine, just people.
Yeah, but a chapstick lesbian, just people. Yeah, a chapstick lesbian,
just in their raw state, not done up, just raw
women. So I don't think raw women sell, basically, and so it wouldn't make the TV. Is my guess about the TV. But then to go to the substantive issue, which is why you were surprised to see that there were lesbians or queer women, and we'll get to that, responding to the male sexual selection, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps I called you optimistic because, firstly, I think this show is this the show that was it Danny Minogue? Is that right?
Yeah.
And so it's a show for queer women, quote unquote queer women. And we know from at least data in Australia that I've looked at myself, and even from the LGBT lobby, the data shows that women who are queer identified, most of them are bisexual or even mostly heterosexual. And I use that as a data term, not as a pejorative.
Right.
So if you're queer because you're bisexual or you're mostly heterosexual, excuse me, then you do still you are still
Yeah. You're
cognizant
in
of
that whole
natural
game.
selection, basically, that pressure of
Yeah.
to perform femininity. And
Yeah.
so I'm not sure how many of the lesbians, how many of the queer women were actual lesbians. Maybe just that one.
No, that's true. There was certainly bisexual representation and they were very deliberate about that. So, but I'm not sure if that accounts for all of the femininity. I think it
Yeah.
doesn't. I think there were definitely like bisexuals and then there were lots of just like femme lesbians and even the lesbians that were supposedly butch. Like one in particular wasn't just no makeup but this weird gloriously long hair and then at the reunion showed up in makeup and a dress. So just nothing made any sense to me.
Yeah.
But I mean maybe one thing you're going to say is like the sexual selection stuff, it's so long term that it's just having an impact on culture, right? It's not like it works on each individual woman. And so if she doesn't like men, she's exempt from it, right? No, there's just these general ideas about like what women should be like and what women should be pretty or beautiful or well dressed or thin, or she's not, they're not like, oh, don't worry, you're fine. You're going to grow up to be gay. So yeah, maybe it's silly to expect that they somehow would have gotten enculturated into femininity like that. And then as soon as they realize they're lesbians, just somehow throwing off the cloak.
Yeah.
But then it's like, why is that one woman so cool? I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, maybe she's autistic. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, autistic people tend not to
explain.
Respond to social norms in predictable ways. Maybe, or maybe she's just like tough and excellent and has managed to throw off the shackles of the male gaze. But I mean, that's it is.
I prefer to believe that. So I have one hero.
One out of 20. But there are lesbians who do perform, quote unquote, perform femininity or just feminine lesbians. Maybe instead of me explaining that, maybe you could explain how a woman who is not interested in men and so doesn't want to be, quote unquote, selected by them, how she would come to internalize the female gender norm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's like a lot of. It's not so clear in the case of lesbians, right? Like with gay boys, they often are, sorry, with gay men, they often are feminine boys, right? Like, so I think it's something like 75% or more of adult gay men were feminine boys. And that's, I think, not true with lesbians. Like, you can have your tomboy girls and they're just tomboys. And some of the tomboys grow up to be lesbians, but lots of the lesbians were just, you could not detect their difference as little girls. And again, I think that needs a separate explanation too. I mean, maybe it's just in the like cultural tendencies to be more sociable or more conformist or whatever. And so I think that's actually true of me, for example. I think I don't have a strong sexuality, and I think I was just participating in the social fun of having crushes on boys. Like, I don't think, if I have to look back, it's like not much of that was about actually being interested in the boy. It was a lot about me and that girl giggling together about how we're, and then ringing and seeing who gets the phone call. Like, it's just so much of a fun, like reeling in the fish and then who wants fish. Not at all, but that's the game, right? Like the catch. So sorry, that's all to say, if it was more clear that lesbians tend to be tomboy girls, then you might think they're subject to a different sort of socialization. We can argue then about really how exempt tomboys are. Probably they're not. Maybe they get even more because they are non-conforming all along, so they're facing more sort of sanctions and rewards as they go. But otherwise, all the other women are just having a normal experience as girls, right? They're getting all the cultural messaging about, which I think is overwhelming. Like you're getting propagandized into big romance, for example, like the dream of meeting the strong, handsome male, like the white picket fence and the 2.5 children and the like. All
Do we
of that
still
is
have
so.
That? 2.5 children, white picket fence in Western culture?
I feel like, well, maybe I'm speaking from my age group, which is, like 40-ish-year-old women now. But I feel like almost everyone I knew growing up wanted to like fall in love with a wonderful man and have children. And they still had the dream of what their parents were like, right? Like staying together and having a, so
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe that's just a skewed sample. Of course, it is true that there's like a backlash now against all the like casual sex norms, and there's people repudiating dating altogether. So maybe things are changing a bit in the younger women. And I guess, of course, the new thing is that there's so much more career pressure, I guess, since the second wave, and then women have this feeling that they're supposed to be accomplishing both, and maybe that leads to more women just deciding to like choose the career side or sacrifice the family side. I'd be surprised if many heterosexual women were sacrificing love. I feel like that is still a big ideal. I don't know. Do you think that doesn't seem right to you?
I don't know. That's why I asked. But if I was going to hazard a guess, there is a culture. It seems to me that in Western culture, at least in Australia, there's a sort of this idea that if what you really want is to if you're a woman and what you really want is to marry a man and have children, maybe you want to be a homemaker, you want to be a stay-at-home mum, that you're somehow lesser than a woman who is a powerhouse, maybe the breadwinner, or at least sharing the breadwinning, and you have this high-powered career. I feel like the social pressure, or at least in the university classes, is to have this career. And if you just want to be a housewife or a mother, and that's your goal, to raise a family, then you're socially sanctioned for that. I feel that that's in our culture.
That's interesting. That I think it's important what you said, that like in the university classes or whatever, because I was thinking as you said it, this probably divides progressives from conservatives. I think there's probably still a lot of conservative women that at least have the like going part-time dream, or maybe 5 years with the children and then slowly going back into the workforce, but you're not as obsessed about career progression. But I think you're certainly right about like left-wing women, or women who've already had like accomplished careers young and then they hit the age of thinking about wanting to have a family, that there is more of the norm of like having everything, or definitely not giving this up for that.
So
and maybe that's partly a feminist thing too, right? Like the left has a more like at least a hat tip toward feminist ideals. So like don't give up your great career for becoming a domestic slave or whatever that.
Exactly. So you're right, there's not just the divide between the progressives and conservatives on this issue, particularly also maybe not give up your career but going part-time, which mimics the university classes, right? We know universities are at the moment like 95% progressive on paper, but also a divide, perhaps, I don't have the data on this, but a divide between I called it the university classes. I mean, people who have a university education and work in professional careers versus the working classes, who work in trades and in care work and stuff like that. Maybe the pressure to be a good feminist and not give up your career for a family is not as strong if you haven't been through the university system.
Maybe. Yeah, possibly. I think it will probably depend a lot on your what sorts of networks. Well, if you're embedded in like religious networks, for example, I'm sure there's the opposite pressure, and then you have a conservative culture and you spend a lot of time in your cultural groups and so on. I mean, that's one of the famous double binds that gets referred to, right? Like, you're a shit mum if you keep your job, and then you're a shit, like, not really committed to your career person if you choose. So damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Exactly.
Like,
What's a can you explain for viewers who might not be radfems what a double bind is?
Oh yes, I'd love to. Asking a lecturer to explain things out, and just like their eyes light up. There's this anecdote in one of Cordelia Fine's books, where her son asks her something like, what is sex or what is gender? And she describes it as like, she takes a deep breath and she's like, well, and then he's like, no, I just want the short answer. You can see it coming a mile away. So this is, it's Marilyn Frye's, at least I know the concept from Marilyn Frye, although it could well be one of those things where someone else did it earlier and then we get in trouble for not citing the original person. But let's just say it's Marilyn Frye. And she has this idea of like, the pop version is just you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So she says it as being kind of caged in by these dual things. So she thinks there's not just the child one, right? Like you choose to stay home with the children, you're a bad careerist. You choose to work, you're a bad mother. But then there's another bar of the cage, which is like you have too much sex, you're a slut, and you have no sex, you're frigid. The next bar. And so the thought is like when people are oppressed, or she does say oppressed, I think, but you can argue about the term, they face these systematic like double binds where they are damned if they do and damned if they don't. And I think it's an interesting concept in the singular even, right? The sort of like the situation you're in when it comes to sex. Oh, you better have exactly the right amount of sex so that you're not frigid and you're not a slut. And then make exactly the right decision about your career, and whichever one you make, you're still going to get it in the neck from those critics or whatever. And so I think, and actually most famously recently, right, it was the speech. That's what I should have said first. It's the America Ferrera speech in the Barbie movie. So when she does the women are expected to like soliloquy, she is doing Marilyn Frye's double bind concept translated for a popular audience. Yeah.
I haven't seen it. Shh, don't tell anyone. It's even now. I think
spoiler.
it's now even on Netflix or Apple TV or something. So I should watch it, but I haven't seen it yet.
I don't feel bad for spoiling the feminist content for you because you've had more than enough time to watch it.
My university training is in statistical analysis, basically, and a particular type of statistical analysis that has to be really good at making predictions. And that's what I really like about this model of gender norms that sort of came up through radical feminism, as I understand it, although it started with Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a suffragette. Is that right? She was the first one to say.
There's like many earlier observations that kind of look like this, where it's like, well, she's treated pretty differently to him.
Yeah.
So you can sort of track a history further back, but I think it's the Radfems that took it up with a vengeance.
Yes, and they did. So this model, one reason I'm particularly persuaded by this model of gender norms and the social enforcement of gender norms is they're really good at making predictions. It's really good at making predictions about how women will feel and how men will feel, and what will be socially enforced, how people will respond to that social enforcement. So I thought it might be a good exercise for me to tell you if we could make some predictions using gender norms about particular women's situations. Ready to give that a go?
Yeah, let's give it a go.
All right. So I've got a few. The first one is why, for trans-identified women and people questioning their agender identity, why does the word woman feel bad?
Oh, well, then I'm just representing my team, right?
Sure.
Okay, so the Radfems will say...
Yeah, what does the model say?
Yeah, the weight of history of ideas around what it means to be a woman, much of which has been in the service of propping up social hierarchy, which is male dominance. So, of course, if you can be made to believe that women are inferior, or women are the emotional ones, or women are the helpmates of a man, or a thing for a man to have sex with or bear his children, then you will do those things and do them willingly. And that is great for him. So you have a long kind of history of this stuff being more or less subtly implemented in culture and then being fed to you through all these things we've talked about already, even just like the films you read or the films you watch or the books you read or whatever messaging you're getting from your peers or culture or whatever. So yeah, that can be a really bad word because it has a lot of bad things associated with it. And one thing the Radfems are trying to do is just deflate that content all the way down to adult human female or female human girl or whatever the young version is.
Yeah. Juvenile.
Not adult. I never say that one, so it's not familiar.
Yeah.
Juvenile. yeah, deflated all the way down. There's, like you've said already, there's a million ways to be a woman, and there's no right way to be a woman. You just have to be female, and then
Yeah.
after that, anything goes.
Yeah, and everything you do as a female person is something that a woman does. So
Yeah.
when you're people who are detransitioning, have women who are detransitioning say that they feel it's an easier path if you talk about being female rather than talking about being woman, because woman does have all this social meaning, and when you hear it applied to you, you kind of like, oh, but I'm not girly, I'm not feminine, don't make me make a sandwich or something. So it does feel bad, and it sounds like the social meaning of that word is like just the weight of history, thousands of years. And it's come to mean, it's come to have a social meaning, even though it would be better if it didn't, because then we wouldn't feel bad when we hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's true. It's a little tricky on this point, right? Because, I mean, there's a sense in which you don't really want to be arguing just about words. Like, so, of course, we could have a reasonable argument about whether it will just be better, like, given all the toxic associations with the word woman and maybe the word man too, we should just leave them behind and just have the sex terms or come up with some new terms. Maybe. I mean, but then you have all your objections about how hard it is to, like, deliberately engineer language, and every language has a word for this concept, so you're going to need some. Okay, so you get into that stuff. I mean, yeah, I just sort of tend to think that that has been a kind of mistake. Like, we want to be able to point to the people who have had this certain sort of history and treatment, and we want to talk about their equality and their freedom. And that is women, right? The second wave was the women's liberation movement. And so it is a little bit strange to be like, which Sally Haslinger and others have done, to just outright become woman abolitionists. Like, no, it's not that we want these people to be free, it's that we want no such people. I just think that is a kind of philosophical mistake about where the problem lies.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you could tell the same story for any sort of object. Like, oh, I don't know, in some terrible period of human history, tables became really bad. Like, we put horrible things on them, or people were tortured on them. Are we table abolitionists? No, we just do sensible things with tables, right? Use them for feasts and happy family gatherings. So I think you can sort of make the same move for women, right? It's like, yeah, there's been a lot of pejorative content, but still we want those people to have better lives, not for there to be no such those people. Don't get hung up on the putting all the social content into the concept itself and then getting obsessed about abolishing the concept. It's like, no, just those people need better lives.
Yeah, I agree. The interesting thing is that the word woman had that feel for me, and I presume other trans-identified women had that caused that emotional response even before the wave of transgender identification, because it has that social meaning. So when someone, and maybe it just might be an age thing, a coming of age thing, you're a girl, you're a young girl, woman thing, and then if you're a woman, you're also, someone describes you as a woman, you're sort of also maturing into, maybe a mother or something like that. So it did have an effect because it has a social meaning for that. And I don't mean to say we should argue about the word, just saying that because of this millennia of history, the word does have social meaning, and it does have an effect on women who are wrangling with gender norms and gender non-conforming women who feel bad about those gender norms. That's all. I don't think we should get rid of the word, but it has an effect.
No, I understand that. I guess this just ties into the sort of now I'm probably going to insult your audiences, which is not what I mean to do. So you translate me into something more polite. But I mean, we're in a sort of age of narcissism, right? Where people are like, well, the word doesn't feel quite right to me. And then suddenly we all better find a way to use I don't just mean this for gender. I mean this across the board, right? Yeah. Like, we're obsessed with people's identities, and we want to, like, why? Stop it. Look outside of yourself to the whole wide world and all of history, and imagine a future that is better for a lot of people. Start doing your part. Like, the the
Yeah.
outwards looking of it. So I think I'm intolerant about these, like I can hear your point, like there's a lot of meaning in this word and it feels wrong to me, but then I'm also like, get over it. Like there's a million, do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's really hard for me to take that seriously, even as a feminist, because I'm just like, yeah, but it's the word. Like it's
Yeah.
just, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna, I don't think that's the thing where we should be focusing our energy of all the things.
Yeah.
The fact that there's a word that maybe feels not quite right to you. And so much of the trans politics is in that
That's
thing,
true.
right? It's just that is slightly annoying to me. It's like that's not an important problem. Like that's a very small problem. And
Yeah.
if you were more outward looking, not you, not them, but like just if people
Royal
were
you.
all more outward looking, that those things would not seem so consequential, right? Because it's not that your whole life project is just curating your perfect self or your authentic. That's not a project. That's a well, it is a project. It's just a dumb project, I think.
Well, that's not meaning of life is like what costume can I put on that feels the best.
Right.
That's not the meaning of life is to have an,
right.
do an action and have
what
the world
can
respond
I
to
do?
your action. Yeah,
yes,
what can I do? Exactly. So
I've been trying to deal with this so much lately in a paper that I'm trying to write. It's like the stuff to do with the self. But the self is the thing that goes out in the world and pursues projects and has relationships and creates things and builds things. And it's like the identity stuff is just all to do with that prior step. Like, who is the self that's going to go and do the things? Forget about that. Go out and do the things. And maybe by doing them, you'll find out who you are and you'll have a more secure sense of self. Build that. Don't try to stay in your room gazing at your navel, building it first. Like, I don't know, I'm sure I sound like a dickhead. I don't mean to be so intolerant. It's just that seems like a generational difference, and it's really like an unpleasant one to me.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. You've been at the center of a lot of battles over this one word woman, and I'm saying, well, it does have social meaning. And you're like, well, let's stop talking about the social meaning and change the social meaning.
Yes, let's change it. Exactly. Yes, which actually, like, I think it's worth highlighting that because there is this kind of ethical question there of like, I'm saying, let's change it, right? Like, so you're exactly right. That's okay, you don't like it? Neither do I. Neither do feminists. Like, this has been the whole historical feminist project. Let's make this thing deflated, minimal, inconsequential. Let's embrace the heterogeneity of ways to be a woman. But it is a political ask, right? It is saying, don't make yourself an exception as an individual. Don't just decide you're not a woman and you're going to solve the problem through pants wearing and leave all the other women to their fate. So I am saying choose the political solution, not the individual escape hatch. And I have to acknowledge that that's a big ask, right? Because it's a lot easier just to take the escape hatch and then get on with your new life as a non-woman. Maybe that does solve your problems, but you didn't help. And I think I'm just, again, like as a political philosopher, as a rad femme, I want you to help. Can you please help? So we should all do our part. That's the plea, I guess.
Yeah, that's excellent. You've skipped ahead to my closing remark. So I don't want to close yet. I've got a couple more things, but I want to respond to this. Excuse me.
Yeah.
The second part of reading your book for me, excuse me again, it's not just, I've made a mistake by adopting non-binary because I've tried to escape gender norms rather than say, actually, no, there's no way to be a woman. I'm going to be this type of woman, whether you like it or not, because I am a woman, that's a woman. I didn't have to do, but I did do the second part of that, which is, not only was I wrong about adopting non-binary, that was just me doing confused feminism, I've actually left all the other women to their fate.
Exactly.
Like I did have that realization. That was the second part of my realization, which is, no, actually the way to do good change for women in the world is to say I'm this type of woman, whether you like it or not, whether it's feminine or not, how weird it is, how sexually attractive it is to men or to women. I'm this type of woman, and that is joining the fight, if you like, to use a rad femme sort of bent to it, joining the fight. And that's better, that's stronger, that's cooler, that's the second part of the realization.
Yeah, I
the
really think that's
non-binaries
right.
sort of
That it's
confused.
harder, it's braver, and it helps more people. Like
Yeah,
you being a non-conforming woman, like every little person who sees that, like then sees a way to be a woman that is less confining for them.
yeah,
And I just find it
yeah,
really heartbreaking. Again, it's that married at first sight, hens night style women. Like, if all the gender non-conforming women leave, they're just like, we're
yeah,
non-binary now, we're men now,
yeah,
we're this. Okay, great. So now the representation of what it means to be a woman is mermaid
yeah,
curls and fake eyelashes.
yeah,
That is such an absurd high standard and such a waste of time. Like, and again, do it if you find it fun and it pays off for you and you've made a rational decision. Like, I'm not knocking that, but that should not be what every woman has to do
yeah,
to be a woman or to be like taken seriously or treated well as a woman.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Exactly. So the part of my realization was, oh yeah, I'm gonna, I'm not helping, and I want to help. And to help, I will
Yeah.
be an example of what it's like if you're, gender non-conforming. You're a bit weird. Maybe you've got autistic traits. Maybe you like wearing hats because it's where you keep your self-confidence. This is where I keep my
I remember, yeah.
self-confidence. Um, and I'll do that. So, absolutely, I want to defend the generation below us a little bit because they have inherited a mental health crisis that has told them the way to have a good life is to constantly self-reflect. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? How is someone else making me feel? What is my personal brand? What identity do I want to put out in social media? So that is not to defend people who have been awful, but just to defend this quote unquote staying in your room and navel gazing. They have inherited a world where that is the path of least resistance. It's also the one that
You
gets you.
mean why? Like, because they grew up with social media, or what? Why exactly do I accept that that's the
Why
world they
should you
got?
accept that Gen Z have inherited a world where they
Do you just
do?
mean there is more focus on mental health and there is social media, or do you mean something stronger than that? Like that's their
Uh,
cultural
I think
norms
I
or
mean a little
something?
bit something stronger than that, which is that there is positive reinforcement of doing these behaviors of
I see.
having a personal brand based around an identity on social media. There's
Mm-hmm.
positive reinforcement of having a mental illness, whether it's anxiety, depression, or something spicier. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, I
So
am
these are
just
social media dynamics of what's being incentivized, rewarded, sanctioned, and so on.
not just social media in the real world as well.
Okay.
This
Okay.
this with the youth mental health crisis. In my opinion, it's real. Young people are really distressed, but it's also socially reinforced. And so
Mm-hmm.
uh, to to choose a path where you're like actually no to identity, I'm just my body and I'm what this is the type of woman I am, is to do something that's disincentivized,
I see. Yeah,
de-incentivized,
okay. So what
unincentivized.
is like we've been talking about being gender non-conforming, so
Yeah,
they've got a version of being like identity non-conforming or like social media incentive non-conform. They've got their version of non-conformity and you have to be like a bit brave or a bit autistic or whatever to choose that. And so I shouldn't have such high expectations of all of them choosing it because that's going to be like a rare and brave thing rather than a like thing that I can just reasonably expect all of them to do. Something like that.
something like that. There's a
Okay.
woman, a Gen Z woman, who's doing works with Jonathan Haidt, I believe.
Yep.
Her name's Fleur, and I've forgotten her last name. I'm sorry. I will link her in the description. And she's doing a brave thing because she's doing interviews and she's writing about how social media makes her and women like her miserable. And she wants to rejoin
Mm-hmm.
the real world, please. She wants real
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And she's talking about how, for her generation, you're not really connected to your friends. If you ever in IRL, in real life, you sort of just have superficial conversations. And if you want to have a real conversation about real feelings, you do it via text message. And so, yeah, Gen Z
Yeah.
have had a very different experience to us.
Yeah.
I love hearing from Fleur because it's not the world I grew up in, and it's got to have an
Yeah.
impact. So, uh,
No,
I
that's really helpful.
yeah,
Thank you. I just don't know that much about that. I mean, like, yeah, first personal stuff from that generation, I guess. And I knew some of the height stuff around the like mental health crisis and the possible links to social media, but I haven't looked that much into that. And yeah, maybe I haven't cut them enough slack for what their cultural norms are and then what it takes to count as like brave and non-conforming. But I think the indictment still stands, right? Like that's a bad culture, like the culture that tells you to look in is bad, even if they're not like individually blameworthy for going along with it, because that's what we've been talking about, right? Well, people throughout history are going along with these norms. Like,
I think the indictment still stands, and I think many, from what I've been reading from likes of Fleur and Jonathan Haidt, many would agree with us that it's a pretty crappy culture to be so internally focused and always talking about your feelings on social media and adopting identities as a way to express yourself rather than just expressing yourself.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was way more in depth than I thought we were going to go. So
I'm watching too much television lately, I think, because this is now the third show I've mentioned. But I watched like that reality show Selling Sunset, where they are just selling
I've seen that.
Sunset Boulevard. And mainly I think I watched it because I heard that G-Flip was dating this Chriselle. So there's this like super, super like feminine, pretty, like, you know, the fake white teeth type people, the $2,000 per tooth veneers.
Per tooth.
I looked it up. Because I've got teeth dysphoria, so I was like, I wonder how much that is. Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was like really interested in G-Flip claiming to be non-binary. But then it was like, it kind of made sense because G-Flip is a lesbian tomboy Australian drummer who wears like shorts. And Chriselle is this like peacock of a woman. Like, you look, if you don't know the show, look her up. Like, she's just a doll, like, and all the other women on the show, they're like glamorized, they look like prostitutes, like high-end prostitutes. These shoes are this high, all tiny, all in these extremely tight dresses, and no one could run. Like, if they had to run away, they'd just be fucked. Like, it's so there is this sense of like what a woman is, or what femininity, like real successful career woman, rich consumer femininity looks like, where it just makes perfect sense that G-Flip is like, well, I'm not like that, so I must be non-binary or whatever.
So thank you so much for your time, Holly. As you know, I'm trying to reach an audience of gender non-conforming women, particularly those who have struggled with transgenderism or are thinking about it or thinking of stopping identifying as transgender. What would be your message for these viewers?
Look, my most minimal message is like, if that is something that you really feel like you want to experiment with, please don't medically or surgically transition. Just like do that socially and fuck around a bit and see whether that's really the right thing. But just like be skeptical and cautious about the cultural norms around like these long-term impactful decisions. And please think a little bit, if you can, about what sorts of beliefs you have about what it means to be a woman, and whether those are revisable. Like, if you start listening and reading to more feminist stuff with where people are pushing back on this more, is that still like a really unattractive thing that you cannot see yourself being a part of, or is there some vision of what it means to be a woman that you could be happy with? And then I guess I would just emphasize our political point from earlier, right? Like, yeah, you can opt out, you can make an exception of yourself, and you can do that. Of course you can. It's up for you to choose that. But that's not the solution that's going to like change things for women. And we have needed throughout history, since the first wave at least, to have like brave women willing to take on costs to improve women's situation, not just the individual situation, but women as a class, and to feel that sense of solidarity with women as a class. And if you can get yourself to a point where you're willing to join that fight and make a contribution to that fight, that means owning the term woman and working to show that there's like many different ways to be a woman, and that you are one of them however you want to be.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Holly. really value your time. Cheers.
It was a pleasure talking to you. Sorry I was so silly at certain points, which does happen.
No, nothing to apologise for. That was very fun. All right.
Okay, bye.